All right, well, it's 1:30, so I think we'll start. My name is Scott Friend. I'm the president of the CFTA, and I would like to welcome everyone to the second in a series of monthly webinars to be held by the CFTA. Today's webinar is on drawing and document management in the campus facilities environment, what works and what doesn't work, with speaker Glenn Seehausen, CEO of ACAD-Plus. I happen to know Glenn myself. He's done our document management implementation here at Michigan State University, and I think this will be a good webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn and let him give you a little bit of background. Glenn, over to you.
Okay, well, oops, now for some reason I'm not getting feedback in my own ears. Can you hear me, Scott? Real quick, let's just make sure.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you very much, Scott. First of all, I want to thank you, Scott, as the president of the CFTA, and also want to thank the rest of the leadership. I know Jose is online, and he's very involved in setting up these webinars, so thank you, Jose, too, and all of the leadership of the CFTA, and for that matter, the organization itself. I think this is an awesome thing you all are doing in addition to the annual conference, which I hope everybody signed up to go to come here to Texas and see us in San Antonio. But I think a monthly webinar like this is quite a neat service for the membership of the CFTA and for others that haven't joined the CFTA yet. So thank you very much. All right, well, let's jump right in. Scott introduced me, so I won't spend much time on this slide. I think most of you probably already know me by now. Been involved with the CFTA in one form or another for a dozen or more years, spoken at the conference almost every year for the last decade, and been in business since 1986, 27 years now. We specialize in two basic things, document management, which is what today's session is focused on, and we particularly focus on the campus facilities environment. So we're particularly knowledgeable on how to apply document management to your world. The other aspect of our business is the CAFM aspect, which today is not about that, so I'll just skip right over it. Okay, let's look at the agenda real quick. Achieving quality metadata. So what I would like to do is answer about 5 or 6 basic questions as a part of this particular presentation. I could talk on document management for days, and I have talked about document management for days. But today I've got less than an hour to work with, so I'm going to address basically 5 or so questions. First one, achieving quality metadata. Since the quality of metadata primarily determines the user's perception of the solution, how is it achieved? Second subject will be integration. How does document management relate to other systems like CAFM, CMMS systems, maintenance management, GIS systems, and project management systems, sometimes called CPM, Capital Project Management. I also want to discuss that I believe that point forward is the best strategy. So we'll talk a bit about why the point forward strategy works best before tackling the archives, and I'll explain what is meant by that. Security. Why is document security critical? And it's for more reasons than you might realize at first. And finally, workflow. What happens if the configured workflow does not match the business process? And then we'll wrap up with some questions at the end. I believe that throughout the session today, since everyone I believe is muted, I'm the only one that can speak right now. If you have a question, please chat it. And if I spot it and it's a good time, I might answer it during the session, or I might wait till the end and scroll through some of the messages or questions and answer them at the end that way. So feel free to chat it during the session, and again, I may not answer it until the end. All right, so the case for quality metadata. Oh, by the way, I will be demonstrating real software during this presentation. I won't just be showing a bunch of PowerPoint. There are about 10 or 15 slides that support my message, but I'm going to jump in and out of real software with real customer solutions. I asked permission from a couple of my different customers to show some of their stuff. So today you're going to see see actual solutions. All right, the case for quality metadata. The solution in the end will be primarily judged by whether users find the documents they need. And you're probably thinking, duh, I needed to join a webinar to find that out? I don't think so. Well, you know, you would think that that would be obvious, and I think it is obvious, but it is amazing to me how many people lose sight of that being the primary goal. And the evidence of that is that I've gone into many organizations that already have some form of document management, and I hear time and time again as I talk to people how frustrated they are about document management. And when I drill into the issues, it almost always boils down to poorly indexed documents or poor quality of metadata. So I think we need to be reminded that that's the primary objective throughout the implementation. So one comment I want to make here is this term indexing even kind of bothers me. I put it on the slide here, but I kind of cringed as I did it because I think indexing has a connotation to it that misses the point. And maybe it's just me personally, but I feel like indexing documents has this connotation that I've paid some clerical student or a clerical or some outside service to just type in the data on the title blocks of drawings as they scan them, for example. And that would be a perfect example of missing the mark in terms of quality metadata. So you'll rarely ever hear me refer to it as indexing, even though I hear that term all the time. The software must certainly be good enough to make it easy to search and browse, but even the best software can't make up for bad metadata. So one of the things that I'm going to focus a lot on in this presentation, probably more than half of it, is how to get quality metadata. And obviously, if the documents aren't being put in the system, they're not going to be found in the system either. So the two main objectives for document management should be A, get quality metadata for any documents that are in the system, and B, get the documents in the system. And that means it has to be easy to use, and it has to match the business requirements or people will avoid it. So avoid the downward spiral caused by bad metadata and missing documents. If the users can't find what they're looking for, what happens? They begin avoiding the system. I hear it time and time again, stupid system, can't ever find what I'm looking for. So how do we avoid that? Because on top of them beginning to avoid the system, now they're probably not storing their documents there anymore, so even more documents aren't available to others. And now even more people can't find what they're looking for, and now more people start avoiding the system, thus the downward spiral to a DMS failure. So I hope to share enough information with you today that if you haven't implemented DMS, you can get on the right track to an upward spiral instead of a downward spiral. So how do we do that? Well, actually, I got ahead of myself. I want to show what quality metadata looks like, and then I'm going to talk about how you get there. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize PowerPoint, and I'm going to go into University of Colorado's document management system. So this is their solution as implemented by myself with the product called Blue Cello Meridian Explorer. So the only way you can tell that this is a product is up here in the top right corner, because the rest of the screen can be skinned to look like your colors and your logos and graphics and what have you. And it should be very easy. So for example, at University of Colorado, they have two basic buckets right now that they're exposing to the organization. Now, not everything that you see in here is exposed to everybody because security certainly comes into play, but I'm logged in such that I'm seeing everything. And there's two basic buckets. They call the sustaining bucket is their master drawings and documents. So for example, their base floor plans, their emergency evacuation plans, etc. And then projects is all of their project documentation, both financial related documentation, correspondence, as well as drawings, etc. I'm going to start simple here with just sustaining. So if I just want to get to an evac plan or get to a base floor plan, How easy is that to do? Well, I can click on buildings, and it brings up a search window on the left. And actually, if I just hit search without entering anything at all, I get some 1,536 documents back. So I could begin scrolling through page after page of these looking for what I want. But I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is start typing anything I know about a building. So for example, I could type library, and it would find that Norland Library has that word somewhere in it. Or I could type in a building number, like 235, and it found that the Hale Science Building is building 235. Or I could have just typed science again, or Hale. But I'm going to go ahead and go with that particular building, and I'm going to do a search. And so immediately I'm down to 27 documents. That's still more than I want to chew on. So perhaps I go to a particular floor, say the first floor. And mostly what they have right now are just drawings, so I'm going to skip over class. Later they may have more. But I can go in and say I want base plans or evac plans or trades plans. So I'm going to say base plans. And then now I'm down to a reasonable set of documents. They have a couple of PDFs and a drawing. If I click one of these, I can view the drawing or the PDF, for example. Now I could broaden this again by clearing this out and just saying search again, and now I can go look at the evac plan, which happens to be using the base plan as an XREF. So this is actually XREF to that. All right, so that's pretty simple, but those kind of files aren't typically real difficult to find. So let's get a little more sophisticated, where the metadata really starts to show itself. So let's go to projects, and I'm going to go to all the documentation, drawings and everything. So now if I hit search, there's some 22,947 documents in here. Actually, this is about a 6-month-old copy of their database. I think today they have over 50,000 documents. So you wouldn't want to scroll through 50,000 documents. So instead we'll do what's called a faceted search that's enabled by the quality of their metadata. So for example, I could pull down a list of all the project numbers that they've ever stored at least one document in the system. And this isn't the whole list right here. I would have to page 52 times to get through the entire list of projects that have at least one document in the system. I want to point out a couple things as I kind of look at these. Notice these project numbers here, because I'm going to come back to talk about this. Notice kind of the look of the project number. And then if I jump to the end, notice it's got a totally different looking project number. And actually, there's a whole nother form of a project number in that begins with CP. So I'm going to come back and talk about that in just a second. So you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to scroll through all those projects. So what you would do, first of all, if you knew a project, so if you were involved in a particular project and you knew the number, yes, you could start typing it, and it will match characters as you type and find the project, select it, hit search, and now I'm down to 72 documents for that particular project. But what if you don't know the project number? Then you want to go in and say, I want to find all the project for a certain building. So I'm going to say the Coors Event Center, which is where they have their basketball arena. And now when I pull down the list of projects, I see only one screen worth here. These are only projects, or the only projects that were involved with the Coors Event Center that they've loaded in, and they're loading more in all the time. But what I want to point out here is some real world issues when it comes to document management in a university or campus setting. They've had a lot of different project conventions over the years. In fact, back in the late 1800s when they were founded, they probably didn't use project numbers at all, or certainly they're meaningless by now. So these project numbers that begin with 420, which is the building number, are simply the old scan stuff that they started putting in, and they're constantly putting more and more of this in. This particular number down here is a convention they had for quite a few years, PR numbers, and then these days they're using CP numbers. So they've had different project management approaches over the years. So it's kind of annoying to see this sorted by project number because this isn't necessarily corresponding to a chronology. So that's a case where better quality metadata can come into play. Here, I'm looking at those same projects, but now not sorted by the number, but sorted by the time frame of the project. So I could see from 1977, the original drawings, every major project that's happened in that building through now. Now, there's probably a lot more. There's a big gap in here that they're scanning still, but they're using the system live today, and they're starting to put in the past, and I'm going to talk about that in a later slide. So if I go to one particular project, I can then again do a search, and I could further filter this down. So I could say, well, I want closeout documentation, or I want contracts related to that project, or correspondence, etc. So I'm going to go to closeout, and there's two types of closeout documents, O&M manuals and record set, CAD drawings. And notice if I change the class to something else, say correspondence, I get totally different subclasses. So this is what we call a document taxonomy, where we've basically set up a hierarchical structure so everybody has a common metaphor for coming at the documents. Now I'm going to go back to the ones that people I think appreciate the most. Well, we'll just do all closeout documents. So now I found the 5 files that this particular project had closeout files for. And I can click the O&M manual, for example, and be viewing it. So here's a PDF file of the O&M manual. And a couple of nice features that a system should ideally have is the ability to be looking at multiple files at the same time. So I can right-click on this and I can say open this in a new tab. So now I'm viewing it, and I can go back to here and I can say, well, let's also, open this in a new tab and view it. And now I've got the O&M manual. Better slow down here. I just realized that there's a delay. I've got the O&M manual. And then on this tab, I've got the AutoCAD drawing. So I can zoom in and etc. Or on the O&M manual, I could page through it, or also zoom in, etc. And with a lot of browsers these days, a nice feature, this is just a function of the browser, but I can actually grab one of these tabs and undock it from there, and then I can put this on my other monitor, for example, which you guys can only see one of my monitors, so I'll leave it hanging off here, but then I could have them side by side on 2 monitors. Okay, but you can't have what you just saw. You cannot drill into, out of 50,000 documents, drill into the 5 closeout documents in seconds like that, or even for that matter, the certain discipline, electrical, for example, drill down to one particular file in seconds like that, unless you have quality metadata. So I'm going to go back to the slides for a minute and talk about how that's achieved, because the devil is in the details. So the first and most important thing, I believe, that has to be done for a document management system to be successful in a campus facilities setting is to leverage data from other systems. And you're going to see how I'm going to show that how that's done. So some examples of data that has been leveraged from other systems at Colorado and at most of my customers is project data from their capital project management system, which I've dubbed CPM. Location data, their site building floor, for example, from their CAFM system. And equipment and work order data from their maintenance management system. And I'm going to show examples of that in just a moment. But to prevent flipping back and forth too much, I'm going to show a few more things on the slide, and then I'll show all of this in the software. Another trick to getting quality metadata is to trigger defaults using business logic. And I'll show this in a minute, where I trigger the location data from the project data. And then I'll also show an example where we trigger the security level based on the document taxonomy. Also, it's important to limit the choices in the lists based on the user's role or based on their prior selections. And also, it's important to minimize fields that require lots of typing. So this reduces error, inconsistencies in how people are entering the data, but also it promotes the use of the system through simplification. And remember, and I keep on saying this over and over again in every document management implementation, quality metadata and get the documents in the system. And if either of those fail, people can't find what they're looking for, people say stupid system and they don't want to use it. So it needs to be easy or people won't use it and therefore the documents won't be in there, but it still needs to get quality data or nobody will be able to find what they're looking for. So the users want business logic. They don't want manual folder and file naming. Otherwise, they'll avoid the system. So let's take a look at how this is accomplished. So for example, when a user puts a document into the system at University of Colorado, they basically just drag and drop the file in, or they can save it directly from most applications as well. So I've got Windows Explorer open on my other monitor. I just dragged it onto the monitor here. And I've just got, this is just standard Windows Explorer, and I'm using Windows 7. And I've opened up a folder with a bunch of files in it. And what I'm going to do is just grab one of these files, and I'm going to drag it and drop it into Meridian. And the first thing it does is it asks the user, well, what kind of a document is it? What business purpose does this document serve? And I'll talk to this briefly later, but right now I'm just going to say that it's a project happening in a building. So it's a remodel project or a new construction project of some kind on a building. Because I picked that choice instead of these other choices, it's going to pop up a specific wizard, and this wizard is going to walk the user through the business logic that they wanted to ensure that we capture quality metadata. And throughout this wizard, it's going to leverage other systems that already existed at University of Colorado for the wealth of data that those systems have, as well as validate against those systems so that there's integrity between the different systems and not silos of terminology. So for example, if they pick that this is a capital project, it's going to reach into their current capital project management system and query for all of the project numbers. So this is data that doesn't have to be entered in the document management system because it was entered in their project management system. The project number, the date of the project, the status of it, the description, the manager, the type, and the location. And so there's obviously a lot of projects in here. If I know the number, I can just type it in, but let's say I don't know the number, I can say, find me all the projects that are happening in the Coors Event Center. And then I can pick a particular project number. And this is the second thing that my PowerPoint showed. It just triggered all of these other values for me. So with one selection of a project number, I'm going to now have about 10 or 15 pieces of metadata that people can search by reliably. I'm not going to just have a project number, but I'm going to have a date, a status, a description, a project manager, etc. It also triggered the location data for that project because their capital project management system has that information in it. We leverage it. They made sure that that data was aligned with their CAFM system. So this query right here for all the buildings on campus is directly into their CAFM system so that we ensure we're tagging the documents with locations data that is the official location. But it already did it for me, so I don't need to pick that. But I just wanted to show that if I select floor, I'm getting that particular building's floors and that particular building's rooms. And this is all coming straight from their CAFM system. You can even see some of the other CAFM data here, the FICM code, etc. Now this is not a CAFM system, so I hope I don't confuse everyone. I'm not showing a CAFM system. I'm showing a document management system that's leveraging the data in the CAFM system. Now they continue to fill in the document taxonomy. And another point that I made in the PowerPoint was that it should be smart enough to default things based on who they are. So it knew that I'm a member of the design and construction group, so it already filled in my responsible group. But if I wear multiple hats, I can go in and say, well, I'm actually acting as part of the CAD group right now, and I'll get a completely different list of classes and subclasses. So I want you to take a mental picture of this list here. closeout, general project information, and report. Whereas if I say I'm a member of the design and construction group, I get a lot different list. So this is what I mentioned in the PowerPoint, that we want the system to be smart enough to know who the user is and offer the right types of choices. Why? Well, the obvious reason, first reason people think of is it gets us better quality data. But the other reason is it reduces the confusion for the user and promotes the use of the system. Therefore, we're going to get more documents in the system. And this is, of course, a hierarchical situation. So if I say it's correspondence that I'm putting in the system, then I get subclasses that make sense for correspondence. And I want you to notice that if I pick that it's a letter, for example, that it just triggered the security level of this document to standard security. Whereas if I pick that it's financial and it's a budget estimate, it just triggered a different security level, that it's high security. Now this is actually done on a per customer basis, and you could have many more levels of security. But in their world, they decided on just 2 levels primarily. If something should be visible outside the department that put it in, then it's standard. So in other words, it's exposed to other departments within facilities. I'm not talking about in the university. I'm talking about departments inside the facilities organization. If, on the other hand, it should be only visible to the people within my own department, design and construction in my example here, then if I put it in high security, only my people within my same department will be able to view those documents. But it could certainly have more levels of security. There could be medium security. I even have some customers that have 4 or 5 levels, so they just call them level 1 through 5. They simply correspond to an audience for the documents. Notice that there's very little on this wizard that has to be typed. So about the only thing, in fact, is the description and then a tiebreaker for the file name. So I'm just going to type a couple things quickly in here because I want to show you what the file naming convention is about briefly. The other thing the system should do is construct the file name for the user. So they're out of the business of worrying about file names, and they're just in the business of filling in the wizards using logic. So the fact that it's a project file and what project number it is coming from these selections I've made. That it's a financial estimate, and then this was my tiebreaker at the end. One other comment I want to make about leveraging other systems' data is equipment. So far we've reached into the capital projects module to fetch a project number. We've reached into the CAFM system to fetch valid locations. And now we're going to reach into the maintenance management system to allow us to tag documents to equipment. So this is all the equipment in the Coors Event Center. So I can come in here and say, show me pump. And I get a list of all the pumps. And I could say, well, I really want to sort this way because I know this is a sump pump manual that I'm putting in, and it's all the same. I want to tag it with all 3 of those. And I'll explain what that does for me in a few minutes. The point right now, again, is quality metadata, leveraging other systems. Now, I've been running my mouth a lot while I showed this wizard. I'm going to go ahead and hit finish and let this document go in the system. Notice it put it right where it belongs. Okay. I described it, by the way, as a financial estimate, and it was really a drawing that I dragged in there, so I was just being silly. But what I wanted to point out is if I go grab another file, so this time I'll grab an O&M manual, a PDF of an O&M manual. So here's one. If I drag another file in here, first of all, I can simply say copy the data that I filled in last time, and then I can simply go change what's different about it. And actually the O&M manuals are put in by the ACAD group. Close out O&M manual. And then they would typically type something more practical in here like Gould pump or whatever it is. Oh, and by the way, you can be viewing the document while you're describing it too. Helps to be able to see what in the world you're putting in. I should have done that earlier. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and hit finish. So the point I wanted to make there is that if I'm not talking the whole time, filling in these wizards is actually incredibly fast. The first document that you put in for a given project might take 10 or 15 seconds. Subsequent ones literally take seconds because you inherit the properties of the last one and you just change what's different. What does that do for us? Well, now we have like 20 or 30 pieces of metadata on each of these documents that we can search on reliably, which is what I started the presentation with. So we can go in here and we can say, I want to organize all these documents by project manager instead of by building. And now if I open up a given project manager, I see just his projects. And I can go to any given project number in here and see all the documentation, meeting minutes, questionnaires, review documents, etc. All based on quality metadata. Okay, go back to my PowerPoint. So I already kind of made a lot of the case for integration, but I want to continue that dialogue for a minute. Because there's a lot of confusion out there, because most maintenance management systems and capital projects management solutions also include some form of document management capability. But they seem to all come up short. At least I haven't found one yet that's very robust in terms of document management. And what do I mean by that? Well, I actually think they shouldn't even call it document management because most of them don't really have document management, even though that's the title they give it. And I don't disparage them. I mean, it's simply not their focus. They're really good at other things, and it's pretty hard to be good at everything. So they think document management is a simple concept typically, and they throw some functionality in their solution related to that. But in the end, it would be better to call them attachments, and a lot of the systems actually admit that and do call them attachments. Some of them have some metadata, so they start to become a little more like a document management system, and some of them have rudimentary check-in, check-out, but most of them don't even have that, or version control. And their security options related to the documents is very limited in most of these systems. And even those that do quite a lot in the area of document management, I've never found one that's robust enough to handle all of the complexities of CAD and 3D modeling, which are some of the most valuable documents to the organization. And what I mean by those complexities, and I know you guys know this, but things like XREF relationships, or now with Revit having one model reference another model, again, another form of external referencing, that adds complexity to document management that few systems can support. But it's much more than just the best of breed issue. So in other words, everything I just talked about is not new information, I'm sure, to most of you. It's just the old argument about best of breed. Do we go buy an independent document management system, or do we use what our other systems have built into them? I say it's not just about best of breed, because the other problem is those other systems typically have silos of users. Yet most of the documents tend to span across the silos. So we have a real fundamental problem here. So for example, design and construction may use the capital project management system, but many of the project documents are needed for years outside of the project context by operations and maintenance. So even though we get the closeout drawings, record set drawings or as-built, and we get the O&M manuals and the warranty documentation, in the context of a project, 10 or 20 years later, the context of the project becomes less important, still somewhat valuable, but I don't want to have to find them that way anymore. I want to be able to find them a different way. And furthermore, if they're in the capital project management system, a lot of the time the operations and maintenance side of the house isn't ever using that system. They're using the maintenance management system, or even if these are in one solution, a lot of the time they don't ever wander into the project management module. So it's very difficult to store these documents in these individual solutions and not have the documents siloed to the user community for those individual solutions. Another example of that is space planning and management uses a CAFM system, but the master base drawings that are maintained by them are beneficial to other groups, design and construction, operations and maintenance, environmental health and safety, and even telecom. Even groups that are maybe outside the facilities umbrella, so to speak, can benefit from those documents, like security, etc. So what a robust document management system can do is put all the documents that benefit the larger organization into one system and span the silos, allowing the various groups to securely find and benefit from the documents that they need. But in order to do that, then it must be the document management system must be capable of bidirectionally integrating with the other systems, because we also don't want the document management system to be siloed away from those other systems. We want this all talking to each other, ideally. And I'm going to show a few examples of that. You've already seen the first issue. The first one is we want the document management system to reach into those other solutions and leverage their data where it makes sense for documents. And I already demonstrated that with the wizards, fetching the project numbers, the locations data, and the equipment data from 3 different systems. But it also allows the other direction to occur, where we can search for documents directly from the other systems because they're using common data now. So an example of that is, oops, got my slide a little out of order here. Give me a second. Okay, no, I'm not. I'm fine. I just got confused. Okay, so ensuring that the system supports flexible integration options. So one of the challenges, if we're going to have a separate system for documents, but we're going to reach into these other systems to leverage their data, it must be able to be configured easily to do so, because the systems, we may not even own some of them yet. So in other words, when we first implement document management, maybe we don't have a capital project management module. Maybe all we have is a maintenance management system. Maybe we have a CAFM system. So the system needs to be, the document management system needs to be flexible enough to be able to be linked up to these systems as we acquire them. But even if we have those systems already, who's to say we won't replace them? Or what if an upgrade occurs and they're radically different than they used to be? So the system, if we're going to start leveraging this other data, the solution better be very flexible in terms of how it can be taught to query these other solutions, because they may get replaced and the data resides in a completely different location. One thing that's good news about this, though, all of these systems have the same basic concepts in them. So the fact that it's a project, they almost always have the same handful of key properties that we care about in a document management system. So they're going to always have a project number of some kind, a time frame of some kind, a description of some kind, etc. And so it would be very unusual for you to upgrade or replace one of these solutions and it not have that same fundamental data in it for us to link to. It just may reside in a different database or in a different schema. And the system needs to be able to be configured to reach into those various schemas. And finally, it needs to be bidirectional. It needs to be able to be either completely embedded within the other systems. So in other words, where you're sitting in the maintenance management system and you're looking at documents that are actually stored in the document management system. Or at the very least, it needs to support allowing queries with smart URLs. And I'm going to explain both of those. I'm sure that's kind of confusing right now. So let's take a look at some examples of a integration the other direction, meaning I'm sitting in some other system and I'm wanting to get to documents. So an example would be a simple website like what I have on the screen here, or a GIS application where you've got a campus map and you want to allow the users to be able to select a building on the campus map. So this is that CORS Event Center. And when they do, you want it to query the document management system, in this case Meridian, for all the related documents to that CORS Event Center. Now this is the same solution you've already seen. It's coming up with thumbnails, but you don't have to use the thumbnails if you don't want. You could go right to the same grid view you saw earlier. You can go expand this search window. It's already filtered down to just 262 files because I picked the CORS Event Center. I don't need to worry about picking a building because it's already filtered down to just CORS. So there's no need to pick that. But now I can see all those projects that we saw earlier immediately. And I could blow past the project and say, you know, what I really want are the, let's go with closeout, and let's go with electrical. I want the closeout electrical for the Coors Event Center. Now these are in several different projects, and you can see the project number in the beginning of the file name. But that quickly, with a couple of clicks off of a campus map, closeout electrical, I'm looking at the electrical files that we've gotten over the years. Another example of an integration would be to a maintenance management system. So for example, I'm looking at a work order, and it's tied to a location and to an asset. Now some of the systems actually can support embedding as a frame, because our application can actually be embedded as a web part inside of another application. So our application can be a web part inside of SharePoint, for example, or a web part inside of this maintenance management system. And I'm actually querying when I click on attach documents. Now this is just PowerPoint here, but I'm looking at a work order with an asset, and when I click on attach documents, it's querying Meridian for all the documents that are either related to that work order or to that asset. And then I could further filter down and view the documents. Now, if the system doesn't support being embedded as a frame or as a web part inside of it, at the very least, it can still probably do a button of some kind, which I'm going to go ahead and do an example of, where it does the same thing you already saw earlier. It basically constructed a URL and it passed the equipment number. And now I'm looking at the closeout documents, the manual, etc. So I've been told to work on this pump, and I need the documentation related to the pump. So I double click and view this O&M manual, and then I can go search for the word tools, for example. And it finds the word tools in the O&M manual. And so I could see what tools I'm going to need before I go out there to do some maintenance on this pump. So that's an example of an integration the other direction. So these two things work hand in hand with each other. The fact that the wizards are leveraging these other systems, so we have commonality in the data between them, we're benefiting on the back end by now being able to launch the document management system from the other systems and query for the related documents. Okay, I just realized I'm about 40 minutes into this, so got just a couple more slides and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, point forward, just a real quick comment about this. Those of you who've been to other presentations of mine have probably heard me say this before, but I believe so strongly in it, I pretty much include it in all my presentations because I see this mistake happen again and again. Today's projects are tomorrow's archives. So I believe you should focus initially on this point forward, not on the past, proving that the system will work well for projects that are being done today. So in other words, you should initially design and test this document management system using projects that are happening today. Why? Because that makes sure that it's going to work well for you on projects you're doing now, and probably nobody has a crystal ball, but it's probably going to work well for you on projects that you do in the future. And once you've proven out the system like that, then you can go back and start focusing on the archives. So the opposite approach is the one most people use. Most people focus too much on the plan room, the old archives, because management came in and said, I'm tired of digging through this archive room full of dust, and I want to get all that stuff in a document management system. That's fine, that's a good initiative to have, but the first thing you want to do when you get that document management system is focus on how well it's going to work for you going forward. After you've done that, then start loading the documents in from the past. And what that will prevent is a lot of rework or a dateline that you have to explain forever. So for example, if you focus on the archives first, what inevitably seems to happen is when people start trying to use it going forward, they don't like the way it feels. They don't like the structure of it or the data because it was too focused on just scanning and loading a bunch of stuff from the past. So they say, well, let's fix this problem and let's redesign it so that it works well for going forward. Well, now I got a problem. I either have to go fix the 50,000 documents I already put in the system, or I have to explain why there's this line in the sand that you have to search one way for everything prior to 2013 and a different way for everything post 2013. So you prevent that by focusing on going forward and then loading the past in. And now what it'll feel like when it's all said and done is like you already saw at Colorado. There were documents that in there from 100 years ago. We saw a couple that went dated back to 1977 in my example, and it feels like they've been using Meridian forever. Now they have a lot of stuff to load in over time. It's not magically going to get in there, but as that gap fills between yesteryear and today, ultimately it will look and feel like they've been using Meridian since the 1800s. All right. And then the last subject, briefly, is security. And this one's a real quick comment here is all. But, everybody probably understands that security is important for the obvious reason that we don't want to expose documents to people who have no business viewing them. So if I'm going to put financial documents in the system and there's some people around the organization that have no business looking at those, then that's pretty obvious. We need to get the security right so that doesn't happen. We also have another aspect of security that has to be considered in an implementation, and that is who should be able to edit the documents. So maybe they can see my documents, but they're not responsible for working on them. And then it goes on and on. I mean, who can redline them? I didn't even talk about redlining, and who can approve them, and do we have a gatekeeper, etc. But here's the big point I want to make here. There's a much less obvious reason that security is critical. And that is, if we cannot demonstrate to the organization that their documents are properly secure, users will avoid the system because they'll be afraid to put stuff in there for fear that people are going to see stuff they have no business seeing. And if users are avoiding using the system, then the people who are supposed to see those documents can't see them either. And we're right back on the track of a downward spiral again. We need the system. We need to be able to convince the organization that we've thought through security, and that's not an excuse for keeping the documents held to your chest or on your local drive. That we in fact have thought through it, and you can safely put your documents in there, because if you put them in this way, you can know that this is the only audience that will be able to see them. Okay, and I thought I was done, but I have one last slide. Workflow. So workflow is important. Sorry about that. You're hearing the phone ring in the background. Workflow is important because it encourages more users to use the system because it helps them do their job. Are you catching a theme here in this presentation? We want people using the system because that adds value. If we have a document management system that nobody's putting anything in, what good's that system? And so we need to design a workflow process so that people are encouraged to use it because it's helping them do their work. Plus, it feeds the system sooner rather than later. Why would you want to deprive your organization of the benefits of being able to find documents for projects that are going on right now? Because that's when they're getting used even the most. I mean, they're always valuable to the organization later, but their maximum value is while the project's happening. So if we can get the workflow to align with how they're doing their jobs, basically archiving becomes an automated outcome, not an activity in itself. So in other words, if the users are using the system when they're creating and receiving the documents, they're populating the archives as part of the regular work that they're doing. But it has to be easy, because they're not going to use it if it's not easy. Another example of workflow is protecting the master floor plans using change management or a gatekeeper, and preserving historical versions of those master floor plans. After all, the master floor plans that feed the CAFM system are typically feeding all the other systems with locations data that's critical to a lot of other systems. Wouldn't we want to protect those? Wouldn't we want to know who last changed one of the master floor plans and why? Wouldn't we want to be able to hire student help to change those floor plans but not allow them to release them until somebody reviews them and updates the CAFM system? So workflow basically can allow an organization to safely have people involved in the edit process or the approval process of documents, ensuring that the quality of those documents is maintained, and also having full accountability after the fact in versions in history. And it could actually even span across departments. So perhaps one group is responsible for maintaining the master floor plans and a totally different group is doing life safety plans or emergency egress plans. Well, every time a base floor plan changes, wouldn't it be nice to notify the folks responsible for the life safety plans that, hey, you might want to take a look at it because I just changed the base floor plan? Well, that could be part of an automated email process that occurs when those critical documents are changed. All right. So everybody has seen this slide before that's been to one of my presentations, and I don't have time to go through it all today, but I just wanted to show real quickly. I'm going to jump right to the kind of the full workflow here. But this is the example that I give about workflow in a facilities environment where we have master floor plans and campus maps that we use when we do projects. So we copy a floor plan into a project, and then we go through a project cycle. We might also grab a template or a form and put it in the project and change it there. But the important part here is after a project is done, we really need to close the loop and update the masters and update our standards. And what's really neat is after that's done, this just sits there then as an archive of the project, and the process repeats itself over and over again. And we basically end up having lots of archives automatically as part of just doing the work at the same time as we're updating our masters and we're keeping our templates, forms, and standard specs and stuff like that up to date. All right, well, that's it. What did I do? About 50 minutes or so. So let me glance at the chat here and see if there's some questions I can answer. Scroll backwards here a little bit. Doesn't look like some of these were addressed to me. Some folks answered what CAFM and CMMS is. Okay, Jose asked Glenn, how many FTEs are creating this database in Colorado? Gosh, that's a good question. I know they have a lot of their project managers are using it themselves. Their project managers have project coordinators, kind of like assistants, and all of those use it like crazy. And I want to say they have maybe 10 or 15 project managers and maybe a handful of project coordinators. And then there's people in the CAD group that use it as well. But anyway, they have subscribed to this this approach that I'm describing in here, where their projects team are putting the documents in as they're occurring, as opposed to waiting till the end and paying some archivist to do it. Not that they don't have somebody that monitors the system and helps them, so they still have that function in the organization, but that person's function is more than about reviewing the quality of the metadata and helping the users, and then doing the past archives than it is about stuff being thrown over the wall to them constantly and being put in. All right. Does your product typically work on an iPad? Yes, the current version of the Explorer module, it kind of cobbles along on the iPad. So in other words, it's this definitely works in other browsers like Safari and what have you. So it's just a website. It's not a touch application. But the problem with it, admittedly, is the buttons are too small and stuff, so it's not finger friendly or touch friendly, so to speak. So good news for those of you who already have Meridian. Blucello is releasing later this year their first touch version of the product, which will be like this from an Explorer web-based point of view. It will be compatible with iPads, etc. It's not going to actually be an app. It's going to be a website, but it's going to be a touch-friendly web application. Let's see what else. I'm going to scroll back here. Will this webinar be available for review? Yes, they are recording the webinar. Can you move attachments from Outlook into oh, you said ACAD, but I think you probably meant Meridian. Yes, we have the feature where you can drag documents or attachments or emails themselves directly from Outlook into Meridian. We also have a button that you can push in Outlook that saves them directly into Meridian and fires the wizard. Let's see. Glenn, can you speak, oops, it scrolled off the screen, to how records management can be added to this? Metadata related to a retention schedule. Yes, that's probably a bit of a long response. We definitely have several customers that University of Texas comes to mind, as well as University of Alberta that's very focused on retention issues. And I could demonstrate that another time. But basically you can have in your document taxonomy, your classification system of documents, you can attach to that the notion of how long the documents need by law have to be retained. So like these kind of documents have to be retained 7 years and these 10 years, etc. And then you can easily search the system or even define an agent that searches the system periodically for everything that has passed that date of retention and decide whether you're going to delete it or not, or whether you're going to. And then if you're keeping the paper, it can also help you track whether or not you've boxed that stuff up and sent it for being destroyed. So we definitely have experience doing that, but it's kind of a whole subject of its own. Tiffany Castile asked, where can I get more information on this product? Certainly from myself, Tiffany, if I will get on the screen here my contact information again. So if anybody that wants to, here, let me just jump back to so there's my email address as well as my phone number for anybody who wants to write that down. Mary says, our university is pushing SharePoint as the record documents system. Can you give me a good heavy reason to let them know this is not a good fit for our business? Yeah, I mean, my first snide remark was going to be good luck. SharePoint can be a very powerful solution, but you'll end up spending thousands of hours turning it into an adequate document management system, and even then it'll come short. So the biggest argument I would say for not using SharePoint is there's no way they're going to do it right. It just takes too long and too expensive. They would end up spending more money trying to get SharePoint configured to do it right than if they went out and bought a different solution. But I realize that a lot of people won't accept that argument, so I'll go a little beyond just the fact that it doesn't make fiscal sense to do it with SharePoint and say that SharePoint does not support the complexities of CAD. So I mean, if it's just Word and Excel and PDFs and scanned images, still it'll come up short in my opinion, but it can at least hobble along. But when it comes to storing Revit models and CAD drawings that have external reference relationships, it will be a complete disaster. And yes, Jenny mentioned that SharePoint allows multiple access points or indexing. You can actually put lots of properties on files inside of SharePoint, but again, by the time you spent the effort to turn SharePoint into something you just saw, you would have spent more money than if you just bought a system that was designed for that. Let's see, Tiffany Castile asked, will this integrate easily with Archibus? Absolutely. We're working with numerous customers that use Archibus already. Very familiar with Archibus's data structures and have already integrated it with Archibus. Just so the folks know, we've got a lot of experience with integrating it with eBuilder, with Famous, with AssetWorks, with Maximo, with Archibus. I'm trying to think. That's probably a good enough set of examples. Glenn, how would you contrast Meridian from Laserfish? Laserfish is more of an imaging management system. So for scanned images, it does a great job. I mean, it's a little more SharePoint-like in a sense too, but in that, yeah, it's a system that was designed for office environments and not necessarily for facilities environments, and people have attempted to try to use it that way. It really comes down to the expertise of the implementer as well as the existing tool sets they have, so they don't have to start from such a blank slate. A lot of these document management systems, it's kind of like going and buying Oracle or SQL Server. They don't do anything until you configure them. So a lot of what you're looking for in a document management system is the expertise of the person implementing it in your business environment, as well as the templates that they have so that they don't have to start from scratch, or it's incredibly expensive to get to a good result. Can videos be delivered? We get lots of training videos. Absolutely. We have several customers storing videos in the system. Videos are very large files, and our viewer doesn't stream the files the way you would hope. So we came up with a really clever trick where we store the videos outside the system, but we manage that within the system. And it's really kind of clever. We use an HTML page that points to the video inside of our viewer, and then the HTML browser does the job of the streaming. Anyway, long story short, it does take a little bit of cleverness to put videos in our system, but we do have several customers doing it successfully. Jacqueline asked Tririga. Yes, we have done some integration with Tririga, CAFM particularly. I believe, let's see, last question here because we're over time. Can this or other systems be used to show information about hard copies that are available? We have lots of prints and we aren't interested in digitizing. Yes, in fact, we're doing a project right now with the University of Alberta up in Edmonton that is focused solely on that at the moment. They have just tons of paper files that they need to track the location of those files and the retention policies surrounding those. So absolutely, that is, there's nothing saying that the document management system has to have an actual file stored in it. It can point to nothing, and the viewer would just simply not be able to show the document, but it could have metadata that points the user as to where the physical piece of paper is in fact stored. All right, well, it's 1 minute past, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to end the questions there and honor everybody's time, but thank you so much. Scott, did you need to do a wrap-up?
Yes, I would like to thank Glenn Seehausen, CEO of ACAD-Plus, for his presentation on drawing and document management in the campus facilities environment, what works and what does not work. We will be posting the presentation material on the CFTA website for download, and we will be posting a recording of the presentation online for viewing. So look for links on our webpage soon on where to find this information. I would also like to announce next month's webinar. It will be presented by Aaron Chevernot from the University of Washington on GIS interior space mapping. It will be on Thursday, May 23rd at 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. So look for the announcement on our Facebook page and our website and our listserv. With that, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next month.